everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. A special welcome to you if you are watching me on YouTube for the first time. A warm welcome from Cape Town. So in this channel, I share with you guys my journey of understanding and learning 3D animation, with the ultimate goal of creating my own 3D animation movie. So in other words, what I'm sharing with you guys is what I'm learning as I'm trying to make my own movie. So thus far, what I shared with you guys was how I create my characters inside Reallusion's character creator, basically using morph sliders, taking them through iClone and then bringing them through into Unreal Engine, where I've got another video on how I liked my characters to try and get a similar look and feel to a Disney Pixar type animation. Today I'm going to share with you guys the most difficult thing of all. Animating like Disney and Pixar. So I've been doing a lot of reading, watching a lot of videos, been looking at the 12 principles of animation and trying to implement that. And again, guys, I've got a long way to go. I am an amateur, so I'm not a professional, and that's why I'm sharing with you guys what I'm learning. So before we get into the tutorial, I'm going to just show you guys a short little clip of what the goal or the ultimate goal is. And then straight after that, we'll go straight into a step-by-step tutorial on how to do a head direction change. Enjoy. Okay, so there was definitely more than just a head change of direction. There was also some facial expression changes, I'm not sure if you noticed that, as well as some custom eye blinks which I created, and then in the middle of all of that was some eye direction change as well. So the plan is for us to look at just the head change of direction today. Next week we'll focus specifically on the facial expressions. We'll be creating some custom facial expressions, and then the week after that we'll look at the eye or the eye mask, so basically the brows, the eyes, and how I dealt with that. We'll create some eye blinks and look at that in week number 3. But before we get into any animation in terms of iClone animation, I think this is a good time for me just to run through some of the basic principles of animation. Some of this is based off the 12 principles of animation. Let's have a look at that first, and then we'll jump straight into the actual animation process. Okay, let's plan our animation, starting with the timeline. Alright, let's use our timeline to plan out our poses. So we're going to start off with keyframe number 1, which is where we'll have what we'll call our key pose A, where the head is turned completely to the right hand side. And then for now, let's estimate the end of our head turn to be around keyframe 30, which we'll call key pose B, where the head is completely turned into the left direction. So the natural assumption is that around keyframe 15 will be the middle of our head turn, which is not exactly true. And this is where some of those 12 principles of animation actually comes in play. We're going to need a couple of frames in the beginning to hold key pose A, and then we'll also need about 3 or 4 keyframes to do what is called an anticipation. So in fact, our head turn will actually start at around keyframe 15, which will be the end of our anticipation. So keyframe 15 to keyframe 30 is actually where the head is going to be turning. Okay, so that puts our middle of the head turn at around keyframe number 21. I'm not too concerned about the exact keyframe at this stage. We can always check it later on to see if the timing is correct, but for now let's make it keyframe 21. And then if you know anything about pose to pose animation, you'll know that there's a pose, key pose A and key pose B, and then there's usually a hold or a moving hold. So at the end of this particular head turn, we'll have a hold from frame 30 to plus minus frame 37. And then finally, we need to accommodate for what's called an overshoot or a follow-through according to the 12 principles of animation. And what that is basically the opposite of anticipation. A follow-through is where the head actually goes beyond where it's going to stop and then it eventually settles on keyframe 30. We'll need about plus minus 4 keyframes for that, so our overshoot will probably happen at around keyframe 26, and then the last 4 frames will basically take the head back to where it's going to be settling, which is our final key pose in this particular case, which is key pose B. Okay, so a quick summary of the different stages of this particular animation. From keyframe 1 to 15 will be the anticipation stage, which will include a hold of about 12 frames and then 4 or 5 frames for the actual anticipation. And then we'll do our head turn or our main action from keyframe 15 through to 26. And then we'll allow 4 keyframes just to settle the head back to our actual position, which is keyframe B. And then of course there's another hold before the next head movement of 7 frames at the end. So before we get into the actual head turn animation in the timeline, just a couple of our project settings in case you want to follow along with me. The first thing I do, and I do this on all my projects, I take the modifier window, which is by default on the right hand side of the screen, and I actually dock that modifier window with the rest of the windows on the left hand side, which allows me to have a much bigger viewport, and that's especially important if you're busy animating. Then the other things that I change inside my actual project settings, I normally increase my frames so that I can animate a little bit longer. I normally change that to 3000. And then the second thing I do is this is very important if you're going to be animating and you want your animations to look sort of a Pixar style, is to actually change the keyframes from 60 frames per second, which is the default for iClone, which is usually the frames used for gaming, to a more movie-like keyframe setting, which is 24 frames per second. So I'm going to be animating based on 24 frames per second, which is going to make a massive difference if you're using a 60 frame per second animation. And finally, we can start doing the animation head turn for our character, Amy Roberts. Let's go. Because we did such thorough planning, I don't reckon the actual timeline animation should take us that long, but let's get going. So to start off with, you need to open up your timeline. If your timeline is not open, you can simply hit F3, and then we can zoom in on the timeline and set our three main keys. So our three main keys would be our opening key, which is our key pose A key, and then we'll set 4 or 5 frames down, we'll set the end of the anticipation, which is actually where the head turn starts. And then of course our second key pose, which is key pose B, at 30 frames down. So that will set us going for our actual timing. Now let's get into the actual animation of the head. So you can animate the head in one of two ways. You can either do it through body animation or you can do it through the face key animation. I find the face key animation to be much better because it's a lot easier to control. So to open up the face key panel, you need to go into the modify tab, and then inside the animation tab, you'll find the face key tab there. Once you click on it, this window will open. And it's in fact those sliders we're going to be manipulating to do the actual head turn. I'm going to delete all the unnecessary keys. I'm only focusing on the head here, so I'll take out all the keys under muscle, all the keys under eye blink, and all the keys under eye. Okay, now we can actually move the head by morphing it. We're going to use the sliders to turn the head. In our case, it's going to be a head turn left, which we'll turn up. And then I'm also going to create keys for my overshoot at this stage. I'm going to do the animation of the overshoot in the curve editor. I'll show you guys that later on. Let's have a look at our animation. Yeah, not very nice. We don't want straight lines. We want arcs according to the 12 principles of animation. It just looks a lot better. So it's easy to create an arc. We're just going to find the midway breakdown key and then just tilt the head down so we can have the downward arc. And then I'm also going to tilt the head slightly to the left hand side so that the chin is actually leading the action. Yeah, that's good. The timing is out though, so I'm gonna favor the beginning of the animation. So in other words, most of the head turn is going to take place in the beginning and will ease out towards the end. Now it's just a matter of getting the timing right. So I'm running at double speed, so what you guys are seeing is not actually the speed. So yeah, now we're just getting the timing right in the animation. You'll see that I'm also setting some offset keys. I'm only setting the keys now. I'm actually going to do all of the animation and smoothing out inside the curve editor. So let's get into the curve editor. So I discovered that using the curve editor is not actually as intimidating as I used to think. It's actually quite simple. So there's a number of ways to open up the curve editor. The quickest way I think is probably to right click on your actual timeline animation and just pick curve editor. It'll bring up a whole list of different curves. Don't be intimidated by the long list. In our case, we're going to focus on the head. So all I'm going to do is search for head, and that will bring up our head curves. So we're going to start off by looking at the head turn down curve, which is this one here. And like I mentioned, I want to favor the animation towards the beginning. So I'm literally taking the curve and shifting it to the left-hand side. And then to create the overshoot is actually very easy. We've already created the key. So I find that particular key. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to drop that particular portion of the curve by -4, which I've discovered is actually a nice slight sort of overshoot. If you want a heavier overshoot, you'll just increase that number. And there we go. That will create our overshoot for us. So here's another nice graphical view of our planning earlier on inside the curve editor. So those keys represent the actual head turn animation. In this particular case, it's the down turn. And then of course there's the overshoot keys, which is about 3 or 4 keys for that. And then we'll have a whole pose for the second pose itself. But we still got to do the curves for the whole pose 1, or at least the anticipation section after the whole pose 1. So I think this is also a nice graphical representation of what it actually looks like. The first thing we have to do is create our anticipation animation, and that's done the same way we did our overshoot, except it's done on the front side of the curve. So we move to the front side of the curve, give ourselves 4 keys, and then as we did earlier on, we just drop the curve by -4, just to give that action before the action, which is our anticipation for the head. Now let's have a quick look to see how smooth our arcs are. Oh, that's perfect. Now all we're going to do is create the same overshoot and anticipation curves on our main head turn left curve. Okay, so the process is exactly the same. We're literally going to drop the curve at the beginning by -4 to create our anticipation, and then we'll raise the curve at the top for overshoot. Alright, that's it, animation done. Now all we're going to do is have a look at our animation, polish it if necessary, and then save it. And then we can reapply it to any character we want. So I'm going to save two versions of this animation. I'm going to save the full animation, which includes all the head turns as well as the expressions. And then I'm also going to save just a single head turn, which I can always reapply to a character when I want my character to turn their head inside an animation. So reapplying these animations is very simple. All you got to do is load in your character. Once your character is loaded in, you literally drag and drop the animation onto your character. So here we're going to just drag and drop the full facial animation, including expressions, onto our character Alexis here. Let's have a look and see what that looks like. Pretty cool. And then finally, let's just see the single head turn, how that looks on her as well. There we go, simple as that. And here's the best part of all. You never have to create another head turn again. I'm serious, you don't have to. If you've got a left head turn and a right head turn, you can manipulate those head turns to suit almost any need. Open up your expression animation inside your timeline, and you can actually pull or push the animation timeline to either speed it up like this by dragging it in. That's what the sped up head turn looks like. Or you can slow it down by dragging out the animation like this. And this is what our slowed down head turn looks like. Quite cool, hey? And what's more is, and this is even better, is you can actually exaggerate the head turn. If you want the head turn to be more exaggerated, in other words, to be wilder, to have a bigger curve, all you got to do is you go into your Modify tab, open up your Animation tab, and if you scroll down, you'll find a long slider that basically manipulates the expression strength. If you want to make a more exaggerated head turn, you just pull that slider up all the way. Yeah, I've got it at 200%, and this is what that looks like. That's a little bit too much, I think. Yeah, and I mean, if you don't like the expressions being so exaggerated, you can actually delete the expressions. And there we go. So now we've got an exaggerated head turn. And if you feel it's too exaggerated and you want it to be a little bit more smaller or slower with a smaller head turn, all you got to do then is you just, once again, use the slider, drag that down to where you want it, press play, and there we go, like a slight little head turn, which you can also use. How cool is that? You can literally do anything with this head turn. You can exaggerate it, you can unexaggerate it, you can speed it up, you can slow it down. So I don't think there's going to be any particular animation where you need a head turn that you can't use it for. Obviously, you need to have at least a left and a right one. And that's it for me for today. Hope you guys got something out of it. Until next week, keep well. Otherwise, if there is a good response on this video, I'm happy to share the actual animation of the head turn with you guys. Let me know in the comments below. And if there is a number of people that needs it or wants it, I will make it available. Cool stuff. I'll see you guys next week. Cheers, Amy. What do you think?